Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Eyewitness Newsmakers. I'm your host, Doug Miller. On March the 23rd, chemists Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann rocked the world of science. They announced that they had achieved cold fusion in their laboratory at the University of Utah. The promise of a cheap and a plentiful energy supply grabbed the world's attention. And the two chemists were swamped by the news media, questions about this big development. Finally, they had to stop talking about it and spend time working on the very science they had created. So we're happy to have both gentlemen with us today to talk about the progress of cold fusion at this point. Dr. Stanley Pons with the University of Utah and Dr. Martin Fleischmann with England Southampton University and also a research scientist now at the University of Utah. Gentlemen, we're pleased to have you with us. Also joining us today is Eyewitness News science specialist Ed Yeates. Ed, of course, has covered a lot of science stories over the years, but few, Ed, you have to admit, compare with the story of cold fusion. In fact, little poll in the newsroom here just recently indicated that it was the top story of 1989.
Yes, I don't think Dr. Fleischmann and Dr. Pons are aware that in that vote that it has become the #1 story of the year.
Ed, in terms of the development of this story over the years and the aspects of it that you followed, it must have been maybe one of the more challenging stories in your career.
Oh, by any standard, Doug, I think the artificial heart was a pronounced story in this area. But the story of Dr. Fleischmann and Dr. Pons' research development has taken the world by storm, and it has developed a controversy that is unequaled. Certainly the artificial heart was controversial, but certainly not by any degree that this story has become.
Gentlemen, it's been a couple of months since we've had an opportunity to visit with you to any degree. You've sort of kept yourselves at arm's length from the media and from the world that hungers for information about this, the status of the experiment. Where are you now? What's developed in the last couple of months?
Well, in the last 2 months, we have devoted ourselves to finishing the major paper, the key paper, the definitive paper that we started. We are now ending that period, and we'll be sending that out in the next few days.
So perhaps I could add there, because of the controversy which was generated, we felt obliged to do two further complete sets of tests. And that was completed in the end of October.
Well, let me just ask you, gentlemen, about this this new paper that you're about to publish. Calorimetry was one of the areas that was highly debated early on in this experiment, and I would assume in this paper that you have answered and addressed all of your critics as far as the calorimetry is concerned. Is that one of the key points in this paper?
We've been careful to answer as many of the criticisms that have been made. I don't think anything particularly new has been added to the paper than we gave. Particularly new in the respect that we determined our results by the same methods. We have sharpened them up. We have determined, the maximum aerial limits that we could possibly have had in those experiments. And that, in that respect, that will be new items in the paper.
And I guess we should, for the viewer, explain that when we talk about calorimetry, we're talking about the technique used, specific technique used to measure the heat.
There is, if I could just add something to that, there is, in this particular research, a need to test a very large number of samples. So no matter how much money you have got, you've got to go for a reasonably inexpensive method of carrying out the experiment. And what we have succeeded in showing, at least to our satisfaction, is that by combining an inexpensive method of measurement with very sophisticated computer analysis, you can in fact get very precise heat data.
Dr. Fleischmann, do you believe that you have silenced the voices of the critics that have challenged your experimentation to this point with perhaps the new documentation?
Well, we hope we shall settle a number of the questions which have been raised. I think that the polarization there has been makes it very unlikely that we can expect to see everybody, suddenly everybody to be convinced by our experimentation. I think this will take some time.
One wants to make a prediction. One would say that the major criticism early on was that the method was too simple. and not precise enough. And if one wanted to make a prediction, I think they will now say, well, it's too complicated.
Simple but complicated.
I mean, it's complete. It's as complete as we know how to make it. I think it's...
Did you regret, Dr. Fleischmann, on March 23rd that you made that comment about that you felt it was so stupid, the experiment, that you didn't want to proceed with it? Has that come back to haunt you?
I think, yes, under the pressure of events, one makes statements which one comes to regret. I think we were relatively inexperienced in making guarded comments. We are both inclined to rush in.
We had simply had 5 years practice with this method and this technique, and at that point we were very confident that people would see very quickly.
Are there still
the experiment.
Are there still surprises in this level of experimentation? You say you've done another round of experiments, another round of documentation to complete that process. Have there still been some discoveries, some ahas at this point?
Oh, yeah.
What have you found new in the last 2 months?
I think the major thing we're finding is that the metallurgical properties of the metal is an extremely important variable in the success of the experiment.
That's the catalyst element?
The rods themselves.
The exact
electrodes
history.
themselves, the history of the metal itself.
And I would add, because we felt compelled to continue experiments over very long durations, our standard experiment time is 3 months, which of course scientists would, doing measurements of heat, would not contemplate. But because we have continued our experiments for such a long period of time, we found this new phenomenon that there are bursts in the production of heat. So there is a totally new phenomenon which was discovered because of the continuation of the experiments.
And at this point, at the conclusion of this round of experiments, what new bottom line findings, other than the burst of heat, anything of particular significance to adding further credibility to the reaction process?
I think there's numerous instances now of high levels of sustained heat, not bursts, but high levels of the baseline sustained heat.
If we had to put this into some kind of perspective, it would be safe to say now, even with the critics, that there is no question on the confirmation of the excess heat output, but the big debate still remains on what is producing all of the extra heat. What is the avenue, whatever this avenue is that is producing heat? That is the only unknown at this point.
You see, you've got to put yourselves in our shoes, and the viewers have to put themselves in our shoes. We expected to find the conventional nuclear reaction paths, and this is the line we pursued. And what we found in various cycles of experiments was that we had a great deal of heat and very few nuclear products of the conventional kind.
But they were there.
They were there in a very minor amount. Now, there must be other reaction paths, but of course it is extremely difficult to find what those reaction paths are, because even the amount of heat you get corresponds to a very small chemical change. So the chemistry required is of a fantastic level of difficulty.
Let me ask you briefly about these potential nuclear byproducts of a reaction. The Japanese last week had a pronounced announcement claiming that they have achieved cold fusion, and also claiming somewhat that it's completely different, even though it appears to be just a modified version of your own experiments. Yet if you talk to some of the physicists, they will say that they're still more impressed with Kevin Wolf's tritium measurements out of Texas A&M than they are with the Japanese announcement. That appears to be more convincing for the physicists, who have long believed you have to come up with this tangible byproduct of a nuclear reaction. What is your analysis of what has happened in Japan and what the physicists are saying here about Kevin Wolf's measurements at Texas A&M?
What is so interesting about the measurements in Texas A&M and the measurements in India especially is that it is quite clear that that you can achieve relatively high levels of tritium. This does not exactly please us, incidentally.
That isn't what you wanted originally.
It's not what we wanted. One can begin to see something of the rationale behind the switching of the path to tritium, but quite clearly there is much more tritium than would correspond to the neutrons. Now, what is very significant, I think, about the Japanese work is that they have now achieved conditions where clearly you can also get relatively high levels of neutrons. This also doesn't please us, and all we would say about that, we understand, we believe what is going on there, and we have, of course, ourselves done some other experiments as well, which would lead us to have some confidence in the Japanese as well.
Gentlemen, there's so much to ask and so much to understand about this level of experimentation. Maybe one of the questions that the viewers, that the general public has, is what's next? Where do you go in terms of developing this science? We'll explore that in just a minute. Stay with us this afternoon. We'll be right back as we explore cold fusion on Eyewitness Newsmakers. Welcome back to Eyewitness Newsmakers. The subject this afternoon, cold fusion. The experimentation, of course, at the University of Utah, and the gentlemen that are responsible for that experiment are with us today. We'd like to introduce Dr. the University of Utah, and also Dr. Martin Fleischmann with England Southampton University, also now a research scientist at the University of Utah. And also joining us today is Eyewitness science specialist Ed Yeates. And Dr. Pons, if I can ask you to begin with, tell us a little of where you envision both the experimentation and the development of the concept of cold fusion, the science of cold fusion. What's the next step as you envision it?
Well, our work is going to be focused on a very large-scale experiment of investigating the parameters which are significant in the experiment. We know what most of these parameters are. We know what chemicals should be used in the system that may be better or worse than the ones we started with. So we need to develop a very large-scale number of experiments to investigate what changing these parameters will do to the amount of heat at which we observe. So we have developed a large matrix of experiments. They are underway now at the center here in Salt Lake. And those first round of experiments will run about 3 months. And at that point, we should have a great deal of information about the path which we need to follow to develop a demonstration device.
As you work towards this goal of trying to come up with a demonstration device, how real is the competitive threat that now is evident apparently from Japan and some other countries that you can stay on top of this and not have them surpass?
Without major federal funding, it will be impossible, literally impossible. I mean, the scope of the experiments that need to be done in that area is enormous. And if you extrapolate by the number of scientists which we understand are working on that project in Japan and India, then you can easily come up with hundreds of millions of dollars, anticipate that they're using hundreds of millions of dollars of research funds in this area right now.
Is DOE considering that level of funding, the Department of Energy?
DOE is considering none. Yeah, not a penny. I mean, specifically set aside for this research area. I think they would entertain small individual research projects, but it's going to be too late for that.
Why is that? Why do you believe that there's that level of lack of interest at the federal level in this country?
Apparently, we stepped on some toes. It's not in our area. It's not, nuclear physics is. We're not nuclear physics.
Why do you say that? I mean, that's a pretty substantial charge.
Well, there's $500 million being spent annually in that area, and I'm afraid that.
No, I'm quite happy with the spend of that money. I think the research which is being done in the high energy nuclear physics area is splendid. I've always said that it must continue. There are sound physical principles involved, and one wants to see what that type of research can lead to. But there are other pieces of research which have to be carried out, and one mustn't have a very narrow-minded attitude about investigations of novel techniques. And we are not unique in that. I mean, there have been many other proposals to try and induce fusion processes or nuclear reactions in general.
That must be maddening, though, if you believe that the federal government or some agency would stand in the way of this level of research because perhaps protocol was not followed to in the norm.
I think that it is just, I would say that the level of funding in the United States of innovative research is too low. And this is just a symptom, and you could cite many other examples. And if the level of funding falls below a certain point, then you will have these controversies.
Do you believe that this conflict that we're seeing now is developing a dangerous precedent, that pure science somehow, new ideas, new concepts, and this philosophy of pure science gets lost in the politics and the jealousies and the egos over money, and the foreign countries take the pure science and run away with it, and run away with the patents and everything else?
Those phenomena have always been part of science policy. This is nothing especially new. I think...
Is it getting worse?
Yes, it is getting worse because the level of funding is inadequate. I think it is true to say that the National Science Foundation will only fund 7% of all new applications from new assistant professors. Now, in that situation, you are bound to get many conflicts. This is inevitable. And I think that at some stage, one has to take a cool look at the whole funding policy.
Have you made a specific request to the Department of Energy and been denied that level of, or any level of funding at this point?
We made a request to the Department of Energy, and which in fact was part of the story, the developing story. In the end, we did not take up the funding which was allocated, and in any case, I think the needs now are so large that they cannot be covered by that type of funding mechanism. At some stage, one has to take a decision to investigate the phenomenon in a comprehensive way, and that cannot be covered by the existing mechanisms.
What should, I'm sorry.
Just a follow-up here to Doug's question. What is the risk of the Department of Energy, say, funding a government laboratory, but then the results of that work do not become published, because it's a government lab and because there may be motives on why that research should be done? I mean, is there a risk that that may happen?
Well, certainly there's been a lot of work that has not been published out of the national labs. That's a fact.
You think
there
they're doing
must
more than
always
they're
be
telling?
a duality or a multiplicity of research efforts. That is the only safe strategy and tactic to adopt in research in general. You should never put all your eggs in one basket. It is new ideas, different ideas. So you must have a multiplicity of funding, you must have a multiplicity of ideas, and a multiplicity of publication media. And the national laboratories, of course, have a very important role in this.
I don't mean to belabor this point. Let me ask one other question, then we'll move on. Do you believe that the federal government, that the Department of Energy has a lid on this in terms of the development of the concept of cold fusion? Has your experimentation gone about as far as it feasibly can without some major additional funding? And by denying that funding, is the lid being kept on this?
The innovative research will have to come to a halt, yes. Investigating new possibilities, major significant discoveries, going after things like that will have to be terminated, yes.
And what's your reaction to that?
Well, it's appalling. I think it's appalling.
Now, if that happens, what are the chances of the Japanese walking away with some of the patent rights if they can continue to keep staying ahead of the research in this country?
We have covered as heavily as we have been able to all areas of this work in the university patents. But since we still don't know precisely the mechanism that's going, that's developing this problem, it may be something totally different than what we've speculated. We don't know that. We don't think so, but it could be, and we won't be the ones to find out. In that case, we could definitely lose patent rights.
I think it is unrealistic to think that in a development of this kind, you can protect yourself completely.
Forever.
I mean, it is, if it turns out to be useful, it's interesting science, and there are obviously many ifs behind it. If it turns out to be useful, then, of course, it will involve many countries, many research scientists, many organizations. So, but what one would like to see is an adequate development in the United States and in Utah, say, and wherever that may, and in other laboratories in the United States, and that requires a different approach to the one which has been followed here. You see, up to a point, you could say that there has been a fair amount of money spent in the United States, but it is all at sixes and sevens. The Japanese, of course, great credit to them, organized their work in a well-structured manner, and say, suppose this is right, what should we do? And that's the path they follow.
They don't
Here
say
the path, suppose it is wrong, what should we do?
Let's don't prove it's wrong. Just make the assumption it's right. You're going to spend the money anyway to prove it's wrong. You might as well try to do something with it.
Obviously, the competition for these rights is big business, the big business of cold fusion, I guess you could say. We'll explore a little more of that. And also, I know part of your concern is the polarization of attitudes regarding the experimentation on both sides of this. We'll talk about those topics coming up. Stay with us on Eyewitness Newsmakers. Welcome back to Eyewitness Newsmakers. Cold fusion, our topic today. The research developed at the University of Utah, and the developers of that concept and research are with us this afternoon. Dr. Stanley Pons with the University of Utah and Dr. Martin Fleischmann with England Southampton University, also a research scientist at the University of Utah. And also with us today is Eyewitness News science specialist Ed Yeates. Ed?
Gentlemen, let me ask you, if this announcement of your research work had not occurred in a public press conference on March 23rd, would it have followed a more secure path? Would it have been safer to follow a policy where it was not released in the public press?
In any piece of research, and especially in such a sensitive area, it is always better to be later rather than earlier. So it would have been better, but in my opinion, the same momentum would still have built up.
You would have gone the same path,
would
no
have-
matter when you made the announcement.
But how has dealing with the public press affected working on the science? Having to deal with the criticism, the papers that are questioning your work?
Well, you have so much energy to spend on a given thing each day. I mean, you don't have an infinite supply, and we find that a lot of our energy is wasted by 8 o'clock in the morning answering faxes, telephone calls, things like this, bad news, good news. It's a real roller coaster. So it has definitely affected our ability to get a lot of science done in the last few months. It's getting better.
If we had published later, the first paper later, we would have been in a better position to correct misapprehensions.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a limited amount of time, you cannot counteract the impression which is generated during the polarization of opinion.
If you had to look into a crystal ball, where do you see fusion in 1990, in the next 12 months?
Well, we know where we want to be.
Where do
by
you
the
want
end
to
of
be by the end
1990.
of 1990? Where do you want to be by the
We
end?
want to be in a secure base to devise a demonstration. That is what our immediate objective is.
This would be a device that's putting out energy that
Yes.
is useful.
Yes. So that you can demonstrate the phenomenon in an easy way, not in a sophisticated way, but
An
on the
easy,
tabletop.
unambiguous way.
In an easy, unambiguous
There's
way.
been a lot of challenges to your professional research. What do you say to your critics at this point? To the people, I mean, you live in this community, a community that takes a great deal of pride in what was developed at the university, the concept of this. How do you answer them, Dr. Pons, at this point?
Well, we simply say that there cannot be literally hundreds now of systematic errors because of, that's at least the number of positive reports and confirmations that have come along and other developments. So we deny that there can be that many systematic errors, which people say that, our critics say that the results are wrong. They're not wrong. I think it's been confirmed enough now, and, our response is, if it is right, there's going to be a problem.
Gentlemen,
There's going to be a large problem.
we're almost out of time. If I can just ask you as we close, has your conviction to cold fusion, the process, has that changed at all, Dr. Fleischmann?
Not at all. I think we would say the polarization made us look more positive than we were. We do not know the exact nuclear paths. We are convinced there are nuclear processes going on.
And Dr. Pons?
Absolutely.
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 No question at all.
Gentlemen, we thank you for sharing your time and in a tremendously interesting subject, and we hope to visit with you again soon. And Ed, thanks for joining us today. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. See you again soon on Eyewitness Newsmakers.